step into the world of Elena Maris, a young woman drowning in debt who accepts a marriage proposal from the mysterious Calder Thorne to save herself and her ailing brother. What begins as a desperate arrangement slowly transforms into something neither of them expected. Will love bloom in this unlikely union? Before we begin this story, comment below where you're watching from. Elena Maris stood at her kitchen window, staring at the stack of overdue bills on the table. At 24, her hands were already rough from endless hours of sewing. The small cottage she shared with her younger brother, Michael, sat on the edge of Pinewood Village, far enough away that the townspeople barely remembered they existed. "Eleanor," Michael's weak voice called from the bedroom. "Are you still awake?" Eleanor quickly wiped away her tears. "Yes, just finishing some mending. Do you need your medicine?" Michael had been sickly since birth, and their father's death last year had left Eleanor alone to care for him and shoulder the mountain of debt her father had accumulated. "No, I'm okay. I just wanted to make sure you weren't working too late again." Eleanor smiled despite herself. Even at 19 and bedridden most days, Michael still tried to take care of her. "I'll be going to bed soon. Promise." The lie came easily. In truth, she would be up most of the night finishing Mrs. Peterson's wedding dress alterations. The $5 she would earn wasn't nearly enough to make a dent in what they owed, but it would buy food for another week. The next morning, Eleanor was awakened by a loud knock at the door. When she opened it, Sheriff Tom Davis stood there, his hat in his hand, looking uncomfortable. "Morning, Elena. I wish I was here on better business." Elena's heart sank. "Sheriff, if this is about the payments, I just need a little more time." "I've given all the extensions I can," he said, handing her an official-looking document. "The bank's foreclosing on the house, and there's a warrant for your arrest for your father's unpaid debts. I'm supposed to bring you in by the end of the week." Elena felt the room spin. "But what about Michael? He can't be moved. He can't go to jail." "I'm sorry, Elena. I truly am." After the sheriff left, Elena sank to the floor, the paper clutched in her trembling hands. Prison. They would take her to prison and put Michael in the county poorhouse, where he wouldn't last a month. She was still sitting there when another knock came at the door. This time it was Mr. Wilson, her father's old friend and the town's only lawyer. "I heard about the sheriff's visit," he said without preamble. "May I come in?" Once seated at her small kitchen table, he got straight to the point. "There might be a way out of this situation, but it's unusual." "I'll do anything," Elena said quickly. "Anything to save Michael." Mr. Wilson nodded slowly. "There's a landowner, Calder Thorne. His property borders the north side of town. He's looking for a wife." Elena stared at him. "What does this have to do with me?" "He's offering to pay off all your father's debts in exchange for marriage. No courtship, no questions, just your name on a license." "Is this some kind of joke?" Elena felt a flush of anger. "No joke. I've known Thorne for years. He keeps to himself, works his land. He's odd, but not cruel. Never heard anyone say a bad word about his character." "Why me? Why not someone from a good family?" Mr. Wilson shrugged. "He doesn't want complications or social connections. You're alone except for your brother, and you need money. It's a business arrangement, and if I refuse, then I'll see you at your hearing on Friday." 3 days later, Elena stood in the town's small church, wearing her mother's old dress, watching as a tall man with dark hair signed his name on the marriage certificate. Calder Thorne hadn't spoken more than 10 words to her since they'd met an hour earlier. He was older, maybe 30, with a hard face that showed years of outdoor work. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way, but there was something striking about his eyes, deep blue and intensely focused. After the brief ceremony, Mr. Wilson handed Elena an envelope. "The deed to your cottage, free and clear, and receipt of all debts paid." "Thank you," she whispered, still unable to believe what she had done. "The wagon's outside," Calder said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "I've made arrangements for your brother." Elena's head snapped up. "What arrangements?" "Dr. Mills will check on him daily. When he's strong enough, he can join us." Before she could respond, he walked out, leaving her to follow. The ride to Calder's farm was silent. Elena clutched her small suitcase, watching as the town disappeared behind them and the landscape grew wilder. They traveled for nearly an hour before turning onto a dirt road that led to a large two-story farmhouse surrounded by fields. "This is it," Calder said, stopping the wagon. The house was sturdy but plain, with a wide porch and simple furniture. Inside, everything was clean but sparse. No decorations, no family photos, nothing to suggest the personality of the man who lived there. "Your room is upstairs, first door on the right," Calder said, carrying her suitcase up the stairs. "Bathrooms at the end of the hall. Kitchen stocked, help yourself." Elena followed him to a bedroom that was surprisingly pleasant, with a large window overlooking the fields and a comfortable-looking bed with clean linens. "Thank you," she said awkwardly. Calder nodded, then hesitated in the doorway. "I don't expect anything from you that you don't want to give. This is your home now. I hope you'll be comfortable here." Before she could reply, he was gone, his heavy footsteps retreating down the stairs. That night, Eleanor sat alone in her new room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the country night. What had she done? Married a complete stranger to escape her debts. She was now Mrs. Thorne, a name that meant nothing to her. The next morning, she woke to find a loaf of fresh bread on the kitchen table and a note saying Calder would be working in the fields all day. For the next week, this became their routine. Calder would leave early and return late, leaving food for her but barely speaking. Elena spent her days exploring the house and property, trying to find clues about the man she had married. But Calder Thorne remained a mystery. One evening, as she was preparing dinner, she heard a crash from the barn. She ran outside to find Calder clutching his hand, blood seeping through his fingers. "What happened?" she gasped. "Machinery slipped." "It's nothing." But his face was pale. Eleanor took charge, leading him to the kitchen where she cleaned and bandaged the deep cut. "You need stitches," she said. "No doctors. Then let me help. I sew for a living, remember?" Reluctantly, he nodded. With steady hands, Elena stitched the wound closed. Calder never flinched, watching her work with those intense blue eyes. "Thank you," he said when she finished. "You're welcome." Elena suddenly felt awkward. This was the longest they'd been in the same room. "I made stew. You should eat something." To her surprise, he stayed at the table while she served the meal. They ate in silence, but it wasn't as uncomfortable as before. The next morning, Elena found a package on the kitchen table. Inside were beautiful fabric scraps, silks, cottons, and fine wools, the kind she could never afford. There was no note, but she knew they were from Calder. He had noticed her mending his work shirts and had brought her materials to work with. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, a routine developed. Calder still spent most days working the land, but he began joining Eleanor for dinner. Their conversations were brief, mostly about practical matters, but gradually Elena learned small things about him. He preferred coffee to tea, he read books on farming techniques, he had lived on this land his entire life. One night, a fierce storm hit the farm. The wind howled, rattling the windows and sending tree branches crashing to the ground. Elena jolted awake when she heard water dripping. The roof was leaking directly over a chair she had been reupholstering. She rushed to move it, struggling with the heavy furniture. Suddenly, Calder was there, lifting it easily. "I've got it. Go back to bed," he said. "I can help," Eleanor insisted. "It's my project." A flash of lightning illuminated his face, and for the first time, Eleanor saw a hint of a smile. "Stubborn, aren't you?" Together, they moved the chair to safety and placed buckets under the leaks. "I've been meaning to fix that part of the roof," Calder said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. In his nightclothes, he looked younger, less severe. "Is there anything I can do to help around here?" Eleanor asked. "I feel useless just sitting in the house all day." Calder looked surprised. "You don't have to work the farm. That wasn't part of our agreement." "I know, but I want to. This is my home now too, isn't it?" Something shifted in Calder's expression. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is." From that night on, things began to change. Calder started teaching Elena about the farm, how to care for the chickens, when to harvest the vegetables in the kitchen garden, which flowers grew best in the rocky soil by the fence. Elena found herself looking forward to their evenings together. Calder was still quiet, but his silence no longer felt like a wall between them. It was more like a comfortable space they both inhabited. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Dr. Mills. Michael was improving and could travel in a few weeks. When Elena told Calder the news, he immediately began clearing out a room on the first floor. "It'll be easier for him than climbing stairs," he explained, moving furniture to make space. "Does he like to read? There are books in the study he can use." Elena was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Yes, he loves reading. Thank you for doing this." Calder paused, a desk chair in his hands. "He's your family. That makes him important to me too." That night, Elena lay awake thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. She had married Calder out of desperation, expecting the worst, but now she found herself in a home where she felt safe, with a man who, despite his gruff exterior, showed kindness in 100 small ways. She wasn't in love with Calder Thorne. Love required knowing someone, and Calder still kept parts of himself hidden away. But for the first time since her father died, Elena felt hope for the future, and that, she decided, was a good place to start. The autumn air turned crisp as September gave way to October. Elena had been at the farm for almost 2 months now, and each day brought small changes. She had planted flowers along the front porch, hung curtains in the bare windows, and slowly, the house was beginning to feel like a home. Today she was particularly excited. Michael was finally coming to live with them. Dr. Mills had declared him strong enough to travel, and Calder had taken the wagon into town to bring him to the farm. Elena moved around the downstairs bedroom one last time, making sure everything was perfect. She had sewn new curtains from some of the fabric Calder had given her and filled a vase with wildflowers from the meadow. The sound of wagon wheels on the gravel driveway sent her heart racing. She ran outside just as Calder was helping Michael. Down from the wagon seat, "Elena!" Michael's face lit up when he saw her. He was still thin, but there was color in his cheeks that hadn't been there in months. Elena hugged him tightly, tears threatening to spill over. "I've missed you so much." "Not as much as I've missed your cooking," Michael joked, but his eyes were serious as he whispered, "Are you really okay here?" "I am," she said with a reassuring smile. "Come inside and see your room." While Michael rested after the journey, Elena prepared dinner. Calder came in from the barn, stomping mud from his boots on the porch. "Is he settled in?" he asked, washing his hands at the kitchen sink. "Yes, he's resting now. Thank you for bringing him here." Calder nodded, then reached into his pocket. "I picked this up in town. Thought your brother might like it." He placed a dog-eared copy of Treasure Island on the table. Elena stared at the book, then at Calder. These small acts of kindness continued to surprise her. "That's his favorite," she said softly. "How did you know?" "You mentioned it once when you were talking about books he enjoyed." The fact that Calder had not only listened, but remembered. Such a detail made Elena's heart beat a little faster. That evening, the three of them ate dinner together. Elena had worried that Michael might feel uncomfortable with Calder, but to her surprise, the two got along immediately. Michael was naturally curious, asking Calder about the farm, and Calder, usually so reserved, answered patiently. "Do you grow wheat in that field I saw when we drove in?" Michael asked. "This year, yes. Next year it'll be soybeans. Have to rotate crops to keep the soil healthy." "Could I help with anything around here?" Michael asked. "I can't do heavy work yet, but Dr. Mills said light activity would be good for me." Calder considered this. "The chicken coop needs repainting. Not hard work, but it takes time I don't have. Would that suit you?" Michael nodded eagerly. "I could. Start tomorrow." Elena watched the exchange with amazement. In one conversation, Calder had given her brother exactly what he needed, not just a task, but a purpose, a way to contribute. Later that night, after Michael had gone to bed, Elena found Calder on the porch staring at the stars. "Michael's already asleep," she said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. "He hasn't been this happy in a long time." "He's a good kid," Calder said. "Smart too." Elena leaned against the porch railing. "I want to thank you for everything you've done for us." Calder shook his head. "No need for thanks. We had an agreement." "The agreement was to pay my debts in exchange for marriage," Elena said quietly. "It didn't include being kind to my brother or to me." Calder was silent for a long moment. "My father wasn't a kind man," he finally said. "After my mother died, this place became like a prison. I swore if I ever had a family of my own it would be different. It was the most Calder had ever revealed. About his past, and Elena felt the weight of his confidence. Well, you've succeeded, she said gently. This place doesn't feel like a prison at all. For the first time, Elena saw a genuine smile spread across Calder's face. It transformed him, softening the hard lines and making him look younger, almost handsome. I'm glad, he said simply, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars. In the weeks that followed, Michael's presence brought new life to the farm. He followed Calder around, eager to learn everything about farming. Despite his physical limitations, he took on small tasks, feeding the chickens, organizing tools, keeping records of the harvest. Elena watched the growing friendship between her brother and her husband with a mixture of joy and confusion. She had married Calder as a business arrangement, but things were changing. She found herself looking for him when he was away in the fields, missing his quiet presence at the dinner table when he worked late. One night, a sudden storm blew in. The wind howled around the house, and rain lashed against the windows. Calder hadn't returned from checking the livestock in the far pasture. He should have been back by now, Elena said, pacing by the window. He knows this land better than anyone, Michael reassured her. He'll be fine. But Elena couldn't shake her worry. When she finally saw Calder's figure struggling toward the house, she ran outside without thinking, the rain soaking her instantly. What are you doing? Calder shouted over the wind, grabbing her arm. Get back inside. Together they ran for the porch, dripping wet and breathless. You're freezing, Elena said, noticing how Calder's hands trembled. Go change. I'll make hot coffee. Michael brought towels, and soon they were all sitting by the fire, the storm raging outside but powerless to touch them within the warmth of the house. I was worried about you, Elena admitted, passing Calder a steaming mug. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It's been a long time since anyone worried about me. The simple truth of his words struck Elena deeply. How lonely Calder's life must have been before. Later that week, Eleanor was cleaning the attic when she found a small trunk tucked under the eaves. Inside were old photographs, a stern-faced man who must have been Calder's father, a lovely young woman with Calder's blue eyes, and a boy who was unmistakably Calder himself, looking serious even as a child. But what caught her attention was a bundle of papers tied with string. Letters, dozens of them, all in Calder's handwriting. None of them addressed to anyone. Curiosity got the better of her and she untied the string. I dreamed of her again last night, one began. It's been 3 years, but I still reach for her in my sleep, still expect to hear her voice when I come in from the fields. Elena realized, with a start, that Calder had been married before. She quickly tied the letters back up, feeling like an intruder into his private grief. She returned everything to the trunk, except for one photograph of the young Calder, which she slipped into her pocket. That evening, after dinner, Eleanor found the courage to ask, "Who was she?" "Your wife." Calder's head snapped up, his eyes guarded. "How did you know about that?" "I found letters in the attic. I didn't read them all," she added quickly. "Just enough to understand." Calder was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. Then, barely audible, he said, "Her name was Sarah. We were married for 2 years. What happened to her?" "Fever. It came on suddenly. By the time I got her to town, it was too late." His voice was flat, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his chair. "I'm sorry," Elena said, reaching out to touch his hand. "I know what it's like to lose someone you love." Calder looked at her touch, then at her face. "Yes, I suppose you do." The conversation seemed to break something open between them. That night, Calder walked Elena to her bedroom door, something he'd never done before. "Good night, Elena," he said softly. "Good night, Calder." For the first time, as she closed her door, Eleanor wished he had stayed. The following days brought a new awareness between them. Their hands would brush when passing dishes at dinner. Their eyes would meet across the room, holding for a moment longer than necessary. Small moments that made Elena's heart race. One afternoon, she was up on a ladder hanging new curtains when the ladder shifted. She let out a small cry as she started to fall, but strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Calder held her against his chest, his heart pounding as hard as hers. "Are you all right?" Elena nodded, unable to speak with his face so close to hers. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he carefully set her on her feet and stepped back. "Be more careful," he said gruffly, then walked away, leaving Elena confused and oddly disappointed. October turned to November. The harvest was in, and the farm prepared for winter. One morning, Elena found Calder fixing an old wooden chair in the barn. "That's been broken for months," she said. "Why fix it now?" "You mentioned it was your favorite place to read," he said, without looking up from his work. "Thought you might want it back." The simple consideration of the gesture touched Elena deeply. "Thank you," Calder nodded, still focused on the chair. "There's a town meeting tonight," he said after a moment. "About the new school. Would you like to come with me?" Elena realized this was the first time Calder had ever suggested they go anywhere together. "Yes," she said, trying to hide her surprise. "I'd like that." That evening, Elena wore her best dress, a blue one she had altered to fit better. When she came downstairs, Calder was waiting, wearing a clean shirt and his good jacket. "You look nice," he said, the compliment awkward but sincere. "So do you." The town meeting was held in the church hall. As they walked in together, Elena noticed the curious stares and whispers. Few people had seen Calder's new wife, and her presence beside the notorious recluse caused quite a stir. Mrs. Peterson, whose wedding dress Elena had altered months ago, approached them. "Elena, what a surprise to see you here, and with Mr. Thorne." Her eyes darted between them, hungry for gossip. "My husband wanted to hear about the new school," Elena said, slipping her arm through Calder's. To her relief, he didn't pull away. Throughout the meeting, Elena was aware of Calder beside her, his solid presence reassuring against the curious eyes of the townspeople. When it was over, several farmers approached Calder with questions about his harvest methods, and to Elena's surprise, he answered them openly. On the ride home, Elena said, "They respect you, the other farmers." Calder kept his eyes on the road. "I keep to myself, but I know the land. They know that." "Then why do you avoid town? Why stay alone out here?" Calder was quiet for so long that Elena thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "After Sarah died, people looked at me differently, with pity, or they tried to match me with their daughters or sisters. It was easier to stay away." "And now?" Elena asked softly. "What about now?" Calder glanced at her, his expression softening in the moonlight. "Now, I'm not alone anymore." The words, simple as they were, warmed Elena more than any love poem could have. When they arrived home, Michael was already asleep. Calder walked Elena to her door as had become their custom. "Thank you for coming with me tonight," he said. "Thank you for asking me." There was a moment of tension, of possibility, but once again, Calder simply said, "Good night, Elena," and turned. Away Elena lay awake that night, thinking about the strange marriage she had entered. She had married Calder to escape her debts, expecting nothing but financial security. Instead, she had found a home, a safe place for her brother, and a man who, despite his gruff exterior, showed more kindness and integrity than anyone she had ever known. Was it possible she was falling in love with her own husband? The thought should have seemed absurd, but it didn't. Instead, it felt like recognizing a truth that had been there all along, waiting for her to notice. The next day, Elena found Calder in the barn, repairing harnesses. "Can I help?" she asked. He looked surprised, but moved over to make room for her on the bench. They worked side by side, their hands occasionally touching as they passed tools back and forth. "Michael seems much stronger," Calder commented. "Dr. Mills says the country air is good for him." "Yes, he's better than I've seen him in years." "Thanks." "To you," Calder shook his head. "I didn't do anything special." "You gave us a home," Elena said simply. "You made us feel safe." Calder's hand stilled on the leather strap he was mending. "Is that how you feel? Safe?" "Yes," Elena said. "And more than that, I feel—" She hesitated, unsure how to express the complicated emotions she felt. "What?" Calder asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I belong here," she finally said. "With you." Calder looked at her, his blue eyes intense. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, He leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, like a question. When they parted, Eleanor saw vulnerability in Calder's eyes that he had never shown before. "I didn't plan for this," he said quietly. "When I offered to marry you, I wasn't looking for feelings." "Neither was I," Elena admitted. "But here we are." Calder nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Here we are." That night at dinner, Michael noticed the change immediately. "You two are acting strange," he said, looking between them. "Did something happen?" Elena blushed, and Calder cleared his throat. "Just a good day's work," he said, but under the table his hand found Elena's, and their fingers intertwined. Later, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Calder and Elena stood on the porch watching the white flakes transform. "The farm, it's beautiful," Elena said. "Yes," Calder agreed, but he was looking at her, not the snow. Elena felt like her heart might burst. How had this happened? How had a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement born of desperation, turned into something that felt so much like happiness? As if reading her thoughts, Calder said, "I never expected this, to feel this way again." "Are you glad?" Eleanor asked, suddenly unsure. "That you married me?" Calder turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Marrying you is the one thing in my life I've done right." And there in the gentle snowfall he kissed her again, no longer tentative, but with a certainty that made Elena's knees weak. Inside the warm house, with Michael asleep and the world turning white outside, Calder and Elena talked late into the night. Not about the farm or daily tasks, but about dreams and fears, about childhoods and futures. They had been married for months, but were only now truly getting to know each other. And with each revelation, each shared memory or hope, Elena felt herself falling deeper in love with the quiet, strong man who had saved her from disaster and was now saving her heart as well. The winter months transformed the farm into a wonderland of white. Snow blanketed the fields and draped the trees in crystal. Inside the farmhouse, warmth came not just from the crackling fire, but from the growing bond between Calder and Eleanor. "I've never seen it so peaceful," Elena said one morning, looking out at the snow-covered landscape while she and Calder had breakfast. "Winter has its own beauty," Calder agreed. "Everything rests, gathers strength for spring." These quiet moments had become precious to Elena. Calder was still a man of few words, but when he did speak, his words carried weight and sincerity that made her listen closely. Michael thrived in the country air despite the cold. His cough had almost disappeared, and Dr. Mills, who visited monthly, declared him healthier than he'd been in years. "It's like watching a different boy," the doctor told Elena during his December visit. "Whatever you're doing here, keep it up." It's not just me," Elena said, watching through the window as Calder showed Michael how to repair a sled. "Calder has been wonderful with him," Dr. Mills nodded thoughtfully. "He's changed too, you know. The whole town's talking about it." "What do you mean?" "Calder Thorne was a ghost after his first wife died, wouldn't speak to anyone, wouldn't come to town except for absolute necessities. Now he's attending town meetings, bringing you to church. On Sundays. He even donated lumber for the new schoolhouse." Eleanor hadn't realized how much Calder had changed. To her, he had always been the quiet but kind man who had saved her from disaster. But clearly, others had seen a different side of him. That evening, while Michael read by the fire, Elena found Calder in the study going over his farm accounts. "Doctor, Mills says you've changed," she said, sitting across from him. Calder looked up, a small smile playing at his lips. "Does he now?" "He says, you used to be a ghost." Calder set down his pencil, considering her words. "I suppose I was. After Sarah died, nothing seemed to matter. I just went through the motions. And now," Elena asked softly. Calder reached across the desk, taking her hand in his. "Now I have something to live for again." The simple honesty of his words made Elena's heart swell. This was why she had fallen in love with him, not for grand gestures or flowery speeches, but for his straightforward truth. Christmas approached, bringing a flurry of activity to the farm. Elena decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons. Michael strung popcorn chains for the small tree Calder had cut. from the woods. Even Calder joined in, carving wooden ornaments in the evenings. On Christmas Eve, after a special dinner, they exchanged simple gifts by firelight. Eleanor had sewn Calder a new shirt and made Michael a warm scarf. Michael gave Elena a drawing he'd made of the farm. Calder helped me get the perspective right, he admitted with a grin. Calder's gift to Michael was a small writing desk that he had built himself. So you can keep your books and papers organized, he explained. When it was time for Calder to give Elena her gift, he seemed nervous. It's not much, he said, handing her a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a piece of velvet, was a silver ring set with a small blue stone. It was my mother's, Calder explained. I know we're already married, but I wanted you to have a proper ring, something that means something. Elena was speechless. She knew how little Calder spoke of his mother, how precious any memory of her must be. It's beautiful, she whispered, slipping it onto her finger beside the plain band they had used for the wedding. I'll treasure it always. That night, for the first time, Calder didn't walk Elena to her door and say goodnight. Instead, he followed her into her room, closing the door behind them. Is this all right? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Elena's answer was to kiss him, a kiss that held all the love and trust that had grown between them over these months. Later, lying in Calder's arms, Elena felt a peace she had never known. This marriage, begun as a desperate bargain, had become the greatest blessing of her life. I love you, she whispered against his chest. Calder's arms tightened around her. And I love you, Elena, more than I ever thought possible. January brought a bitter cold snap. The temperature dropped so low that pipes froze, and livestock had to be brought into the barn. Calder worked from dawn till dusk, trying to keep the farm functioning. One night he came in looking exhausted. The north fence is down, he reported. I'll have to fix it tomorrow or we'll lose livestock. You can't go alone in this weather. Eleanor protested. It's too dangerous. I don't have a choice. The fence won't fix itself. The next morning, Calder set out before dawn, bundled against the cold. Eleanor paced the house all day, watching the sky grow darker as another storm approached. He should be back by now, she told Michael as evening fell. Maybe he's taking shelter in the north cabin, Michael suggested. He told me there's an old hunting cabin up there. But Elena couldn't shake her worry. When the wind howled against the windows, bringing fresh snow, she made a decision. I'm going to look for him, she said, pulling on Calder's spare coat. You can't go out in this, Michael protested. You'll get lost. I know the way to the north pasture. He showed me on clear days. Despite Michael's objections, Eleanor set out, carrying a lantern against the gathering darkness. The wind cut through. Her clothes and snow stung her face, but she pressed on, following the path she had walked with Calder in better weather. She was nearly at the north fence when she spotted a dark shape in the snow. Calder, she cried, rushing forward. Calder was slumped against a fence post, his face pale, his leg at an odd angle. Elena, he said weakly, what are you doing here? Looking for you. She knelt beside him. What happened? Slipped on the ice. Think my leg's broken. Was trying to make it to the cabin. Elena's mind raced. The cabin was closer than the farmhouse, and Calder couldn't walk. Lean on me, she said. We need to get you out of this cold. Together they struggled through the snow, Calder gritting his teeth against the pain. The small hunting cabin appeared just as Elena's strength was failing. Inside it was basic but dry, with a small wood stove, a cot, and simple supplies. Elena quickly built a fire, while Calder collapsed onto the cot. You shouldn't have come looking for me, he said, his voice weak. Too dangerous. Did you really think I wouldn't? Elena asked, using strips torn from her petticoat to bind his leg. I couldn't just sit at home while you were out here? Calder caught her hand. You could have been lost in the storm. So could you. Elena smoothed the hair from his forehead, alarmed at how cold his skin felt. We need to warm you up. She piled the cabin's few blankets on him, then lay down beside him, sharing her body heat. Outside the storm raged, but inside the small cabin, they were safe together. Remember our wedding day? Calder asked after a while, his voice stronger. Now? Elena nodded. I was so scared. So was I, Calder admitted. I thought I was doing the right thing, offering to help you. But part of me was terrified you'd grow to hate me for trapping you in this life. Hate you? Eleanor propped herself up to look at him. How could I hate the man who saved me and my brother? It wasn't just that, Calder said slowly. I'd seen you in town, seen how kind you were even when you had nothing. How you always made time to help old Mrs. Jenkins with her packages, even though you were rushing to make deliveries. How you played with the children outside the church when you thought no one was watching. Elena stared at him. You noticed all that? Calder nodded. I noticed you, Elena, long before I offered to marry you. Why didn't you tell me this before? I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid that you'd think I had planned it all, that I'd used your financial troubles as an excuse to get what I wanted. And what did you want? Calder's eyes held hers. A chance to know the woman who had brought light back into my life just by existing in the world. Elena felt tears well up. All these months, she had thought their love had grown slowly from nothing. But Calder had seen her, had cared for her, even before they spoke. When did you know, she asked, that you loved me? The night of the first storm, he said without hesitation, when you insisted on helping me move that chair, even though you were soaking wet and tired. You were so stubborn, so determined. I knew then I was in trouble. Elena laughed softly. That early? What about you? Calder asked. Elena thought about it. I think it was when you brought those books for Michael. You hadn't even met him yet, but you cared because I cared. That's when I started to see the real you. They talked through the night as the storm gradually subsided. By morning, the world was still and white, transformed by the fresh snow. We need to get you to Dr. Mills, Elena said, checking Calder's leg, which was swollen and bruised. I'll be fine here until the path clears, Calder insisted, but Elena was determined. Using branches from outside, she fashioned a crude sled. We're going home, she declared. Michael will be worried sick. The journey back was slow and painful. Elena pulled the sled while Calder tried to guide her along the safest path. By the time they reached the farmhouse, they were both exhausted. Michael rushed out when he saw them. Thank God, I was about to ride to town for help. With Michael's assistance, they got Calder inside and sent for Dr. Mills, who confirmed that Calder's leg was broken but would heal with time and rest. You're lucky your wife found you when she did, the doctor said. Another few hours in that cold and we might be having a different conversation. After the doctor left, with strict instructions for Calder to stay off his feet, Eleanor fussed around him, making sure he was comfortable on the sofa near the fire. You should rest too, Calder said, catching her hand. You've been through as much as I have. Elena sat beside him. I was so scared when I found you in the snow, she admitted. The thought of losing you. You won't lose me, Calder promised. It'll take more than a broken leg and a snowstorm to keep me from you. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to their lives. With Calder confined to the house, Elena and Michael took over many of the farm chores. Neighbors, hearing of Calder's accident, stopped by with food and offers of help. I've lived here 15 years, Calder remarked after Farmer Jenkins and his sons had spent a day repairing the north fence. And I never knew how many good people were around me. Maybe you never gave them a chance to show it, Elena suggested gently. Calder nodded thoughtfully. I was too wrapped up in my own grief to see anything else. As February melted into March, Calder's leg healed, and he was able to move around with the help of a crutch. One afternoon, Elena found him in the attic, sitting beside the trunk that contained his old letters. What are you doing up here? She asked. You shouldn't be climbing stairs yet. I needed to see these again, he said, holding one of the letters, to remind myself of how far I've come. Elena sat beside him. May I? She asked, gesturing to the letters. Calder nodded, handing her one. I wrote these when I couldn't sleep, when the grief was too much. Eleanor read the painful words of a man lost in sorrow, a man who had given up on happiness. Oh, Calder, she whispered. That's not me anymore, he said firmly. You changed that, Elena. You and Michael, you gave me back my life. Eleanor leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. And you gave us a home, a future. Calder kissed the top of her head. I've been thinking about the future, he said. About making some changes around here. What kind of changes? The East field hasn't been productive for years. I was thinking we could turn it into an orchard. Apple trees, maybe some peach. It would take time to mature, but... He hesitated. I want to build something that will last. For us. For our family. The word family hung in the air between them, full of promise. I'd like that, Elena said softly. Very much. As spring approached, bringing new growth to the farm, Eleanor began to suspect that their family might be expanding sooner than they'd planned. She had missed her monthly cycle twice now, and in the mornings she often felt queasy. She confided her suspicions to Dr. Mills during his next visit. After examining her, he confirmed what she had begun to hope. She was with child. How do I tell Calder? She asked Michael that evening as they washed dishes. Calder was outside checking on the new calves born that week. Michael grinned. Just tell him straight out. That's what he likes best about you. You don't dance around things. When Calder came in, Elena was waiting in the study. Can we talk? She asked. Calder sat down, concern in his eyes. Is something wrong? No, Elena said, a smile breaking through her nervousness. Something's very right. I saw Dr. Mills today. We're going to have a baby. For a moment, Calder just stared at her. Then, with a whoop that startled Elena, he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around despite his still healing leg. Careful, Elena laughed. You'll hurt yourself again. But Calder was grinning like she'd never seen before. A baby, he said in wonder. Our baby. That night, lying beside her in their bed, Calder placed a gentle hand on Elena's still flat stomach. I never thought I'd have this, he admitted. A second chance at happiness, a family. Are you happy, Calder? Elena asked. Truly happy? More than I ever dreamed possible, he said, kissing her softly. You came into my life when I thought all joy was behind me. Now I look forward to every day, to our future together. Elena curled into his embrace. Content in the knowledge that their marriage, begun in desperation, had blossomed into something beautiful and true. The next day, a letter arrived from the bank in town. Calder read it at the breakfast table, his expression unreadable. What is it? Elena asked, worry creeping into her voice. Nothing bad, Calder assured her. Just business from before we were married. He tucked the letter into his pocket and changed the subject. But as the days passed, Elena noticed Calder growing quieter, more distant. He spent long hours in the study with the farm accounts, and twice he rode into town without explanation. Is something wrong? She finally asked one night as they prepared for bed. You've been so preoccupied lately. Just making arrangements, Calder said vaguely. For the future, for the baby. Eleanor wasn't entirely convinced, but she trusted Calder. Whatever was bothering him, he would tell her when he was ready. At the beginning of April, when the first wildflowers dotted the meadows, Calder surprised her with a suggestion. It's our 6-month anniversary tomorrow, he said. I thought we might have a special dinner, just the two of us. Elena was touched by his thoughtfulness. That sounds wonderful. The next day, she spent hours preparing Calder's favorite foods and setting the table with the good dishes they rarely used. She wore her best dress, the blue one that Calder had once said matched her eyes. As she was arranging flowers on the table, there was a knock at the door. A boy from town stood there with an envelope. Mr. Wilson asked me to deliver this to Mrs. Thorne, he said, handing it to Elena. Inside was a document she had never expected to see, proof that her debts had been paid in full months before her wedding to Calder. Elena stared at the paper in confusion. According to this, she had never needed to marry Calder at all. Her debts had been cleared through an anonymous benefactor who had purchased them from the bank. Had Calder known? Had he married her under false pretenses? Her mind spinning, Elena searched for him in the barn, the fields calling his name. But Calder was nowhere to be found. When she returned to the house, trembling with emotion, she found a note by the hearth. You deserved a choice, it read in Calder's precise handwriting, and I took it from you, so I'm giving it back. Beneath, the note was a marriage license, blank at the bottom where signatures should be, and beside it a simple silver ring, similar to the one Calder had given her at Christmas, but newer, smaller, clearly meant for a different hand. As Eleanor stood there, trying to make sense of it all, A gust of wind from the open window lifted the final page of Calder's note, sending it fluttering to the floor. Elena picked it up with shaking hands, reading words that would change everything. I was the one who paid your debts, not out of pity, but because I couldn't bear to see you suffer. I planned to do it anonymously to free you without obligation. But then Mr. Wilson suggested marriage, and selfishly I agreed. I told myself it was to protect you, to ensure you and Michael would always be safe. But the truth is, I wanted you in my life. I had watched you from afar for so long, admired your strength, your kindness. I thought perhaps with time you might come to care for me, and miraculously you did. But our marriage began with a lie. You thought you had no choice, when in fact you did. You deserved better than a husband, chosen out of desperation. You deserved love from the beginning. The ring is my mother's original wedding band. I had hoped to give it to you today, to ask if you would marry me again, not out of necessity, but out of love. But I realized that first, you must be truly free to choose. If you wish to remain my wife, sign the license and wear the ring. If you wish to go, know that the farm is yours and Michael's regardless. I've made the legal arrangements. Your future is secure either way. The choice is yours now, as it always should have been. The note was unsigned. It didn't need to be. Elena clutched the letter to her chest, her mind racing. The truth hit her like a wave. Calder had never needed to marry her. He had already paid her debts, already saved her from prison. The marriage had been his choice all along. But where was he now? Why would he leave on the very day he planned to ask her to stay? She rushed outside, scanning the horizon. In the distance, she spotted a figure walking along the ridge that marked the boundary of the farm. Calder. Without hesitation, Elena ran. Her heart pounded, her lungs burned, but she didn't slow down. Calder must have heard her coming, because he turned, his face a mask of surprise and something else, hope. "Eleanor?" She stopped before him, breathless. "You paid my debts," she said, holding up the letter, "before we ever married." Calder nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" "At first, because I was afraid you'd leave. Later, because I was afraid of what you'd think of me, that I'd manipulated you, tricked you into marriage." "Is that what you think you did?" Eleanor asked, stepping closer. Calder's voice was rough with emotion. "Didn't I? You married me because you thought you had no choice. If you'd known your debts were already paid, would you have said yes that day in the church?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor took her time considering, wanting to give him the honest answer he deserved. "No," she finally said. "I wouldn't have." Pain flashed across Calder's face, but he nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "But Calder," Elena continued, taking his hand, "if you asked me today, knowing everything I know now about the kind, honorable man you are, I would say yes in a heartbeat." Hope dawned in Calder's eyes. "Eleanor, you didn't trick me into loving. You, Calder. That happened on its own, day by day, moment by moment, and it's real. More real than anything I've ever felt." Calder pulled her close, his arms encircling her. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was a coward." "No," Elena said firmly. "You were a man who had been alone too long, who had forgotten how to trust. But you trusted me enough to give me the choice now, even though it might have meant losing me. I couldn't keep living a lie, not with the baby coming. Our child deserves parents who chose each other freely, completely." Elena smiled through tears. "Then ask me, Calder. Ask me the question you wanted to ask tonight." Calder looked at her with such tenderness that Elena's heart swelled. Slowly, he took the small, silver ring from his pocket, the ring he had left by the hearth. "Elena Maris," he said, his voice steady now, "I fell in love with you long before you knew my name. I've watched you grow stronger each day, bringing light and warmth to a house that was cold and empty. You've given me back my life, my hope, my future. Will you marry me again, not out of necessity, but because you choose to, because I choose you today and every day that follows?" "Yes," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Calder, I choose you." Calder slipped the ring onto her finger beside the one she already wore. "My mother's wedding set," he explained. "The engagement ring and the wedding band. They belong together, just like us." They walked back to the farmhouse hand in hand, where Michael was waiting anxiously on the porch. "Is everything all right?" he asked, looking between them. Elena smiled. "Everything is perfect. Calder and I are getting married again, properly this time." Michael grinned. "About time. I was wondering when you two would figure things out." "You knew?" Calder asked, surprised. "That you paid our debts before the wedding?" "Of course, Mr. Wilson told me weeks ago when I ran into him in town. I've just been waiting for you to come clean." Calder shook his head, amazed. "And you never—" "Said anything," Michael shrugged. "Wasn't my secret to tell. Besides, anyone with eyes could see how much you two love each other. The how and why of how it started didn't seem important." That night, they had their anniversary dinner after all. The food had gone cold, but they hardly noticed, too busy making plans for the future, their future, chosen freely and with full hearts. "We should have a real ceremony this time," Elena suggested, "with friends and neighbors." "Whatever you want," Calder agreed, "as long as at the end of the day, you're still my wife." Spring blossomed across the farm, matching the new beginning. In their lives, they set the date for their second wedding for the first Saturday in May, when the wildflowers would carpet the meadows. Word spread quickly through the town. To Elena's surprise, nearly everyone they invited accepted enthusiastically. "People have been waiting for Calder Thorne to rejoin the living for years," Mrs. Peterson explained when she came to help with wedding preparations. "When he married, so suddenly there was plenty of talk. But seeing how you two are together, how he's changed, well, it's like watching a miracle unfold." The day before the wedding, Elena stood in what had once been her separate bedroom, now transformed, into a nursery for the baby due in autumn. Calder had built a cradle with his own hands, carving delicate leaves and vines along the edges. "It's beautiful," she told him as he put the finishing touches on it. "Like its mother," he said, setting down his tools to pull her into his arms. "Are you happy, Elena? Truly happy?" "More than I ever dreamed possible," she assured him. "When I married you that first time, I thought the best I could hope for was safety. I never imagined I'd find love, a true partner, a future filled with joy." The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Unlike their first ceremony, hurried, silent, and lonely, this one filled the farm with laughter and music. Tables were set up in the yard, covered with food brought by neighbors. Children played tag between the apple trees that Calder had planted in the east field. Michael, looking healthier than he had in years, stood as Calder's best man. Dr. Mills gave Elena away, a role he took on with fatherly pride. When it came time for vows, Calder surprised Elena by speaking not the traditional words, but ones he had written himself. "Eleanor," he began, his voice steady and sure, "when I first saw you, you were mending a child's doll on the steps of the church. You had so little yourself, but you gave so freely. I thought then that you were the strongest person I'd ever seen. I married you in haste and secrecy, afraid to show my heart. But you saw me anyway, saw past my silence to the man I could be. You rebuilt me, piece by piece, with your courage, your kindness, your love. Today I make these vows in the light before these witnesses. I promise to be your partner and your friend, to share your burdens and your joys. I promise to show you every day the love I kept hidden for too long, and I promise that you will. Never again doubt that you are chosen, wanted and cherished above all others." Eleanor, tears streaming down her face, took her turn. "Calder, I came to you broken and afraid, seeing our marriage as an end to my dreams. Instead, it was just the beginning. You gave me safety when I needed it most, but then you gave me so much more. A home, a purpose, a love I never expected. You taught me that strength isn't just about enduring hardship, but about opening your heart even when it's scarred. Today, I choose you again with my eyes wide open and my heart full. I promise to stand by you through whatever comes, to be your comfort in sorrow and your companion in joy. And I promise to remind you, whenever you forget, that you are worthy of love, worthy of happiness, worthy of everything good this life has to offer." There wasn't a dry eye in the gathering as they exchanged rings. The old and the new, symbols of a love that had grown from necessity into something beautiful and true. That evening, as the celebration continued around them, Calder and Elena slipped away to the porch, watching the sun set over the land they both loved. "Mrs. Thorne," Calder said, his arm around her waist, "are you enjoying our wedding day?" "Very much, Mr. Thorne," she replied, leaning into him. "Though I must confess, I'm looking forward to tomorrow just as much." "Tomorrow?" "Yes, our first day as a properly married couple, and the day after that and the day after that, all the ordinary days where we just live our lives together. Those are the days I treasure most." Calder smiled, the kind of full, unguarded smile that had once been so rare, but now came easily in Elena's presence. "You know, for a man who spent years not talking, I find I have a lot to say to you. A lifetime's worth, in fact." "Good thing we have a lifetime then," Elena said, placing his hand on her slightly rounded belly where their child grew as night fell, bringing stars to the clear sky. They rejoined their guests. Michael was telling stories by the bonfire, making everyone laugh with tales of his sister's stubbornness and Calder's early, awkward attempts at conversation. Elena looked around at the scene, the farm alive with light and laughter, Michael healthy and happy, Calder by her side, their child growing within her, and marveled at how life could change so completely. A year ago she had been desperate, drowning in debt, seeing no way forward. Now she stood in the center of a life richer than she could have imagined, all because a quiet man had seen her worth and offered her a chance. "What are you thinking?" Calder asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking about choices," she said. "How sometimes the choices we think are the end of our story turn out to be just the beginning." Calder nodded, understanding as he always did. "When I chose to marry you, I thought I was saving you," he said quietly. "I never realized you would save me right back." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, each stopping to embrace the couple and offer well wishes, Elena felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, not because fate or desperation had brought her here, but because she and Calder had chosen each other, eyes open and hearts full. Later that night, in the quiet of their bedroom, Calder held Elena close, his hand gently caressing her growing belly. "I have a confession," he said softly. "Another one?" Elena teased, turning to face him. "What deep secret have you been keeping now, Mr. Thorne?" "The day I married you," he said, suddenly serious. "When we signed that first license in the church, I was terrified you'd look up and see it in my eyes." "See what?" "That I already loved you, that it wasn't just about helping you or giving you, and Michael a safe place. I was afraid you'd see how selfishly happy I was to have you in my home, in my life." Elena touched his face gently. "I was too scared to look at you at all that day. I kept my eyes down, wondering what kind of man would marry a stranger to pay off her debts. And now? What kind of man do you think I am now?" Elena smiled, love shining in her eyes. "The kind who would give a woman her freedom, even if it meant losing her. The kind who builds cradles and plants orchards for a future he once couldn't imagine. The kind I'm proud to call my husband twice over." Calder kissed her, a kiss full of promise and belonging. "I never thought I'd have this again. Love, family, hope. After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. And now, I know it was just waiting. Waiting for you to come along and remind me what it means to truly live." Outside, the stars shone over the farm, the land that had once been Calder's solitary refuge now transformed into a home filled with love. In the room that would soon be the nursery, the cradle stood ready, its carved vines symbolizing the way their lives had intertwined, growing stronger together than they ever could have apart. And on Elena's finger, 2 rings caught the moonlight, one given in silence and secret, the other in joy and celebration. Together they told the story of a love that had begun in desperation, but bloomed into something miraculous, a second chance for a lonely man and a frightened woman to find in each other exactly what they needed most. Not just a bargain, not just a business arrangement, but a true marriage of hearts chosen freely and cherished deeply. The kind of love story that doesn't end with happily ever after, but continues to unfold, day by ordinary day, building a life of quiet joy that outshines any fairy tale. As Eleanor drifted towards sleep in Calder's arms, she thought about the letter that had changed everything, the truth that had set them both free to choose each other again. In the end, that was the greatest gift Calder had given her, not financial security or a safe haven, but the knowledge that she was truly wanted, truly loved, truly chosen, and she had chosen him right back. That night, the Thorne farm settled into peaceful slumber, no longer a place of loneliness and secrets, but a home where love had taken root and would continue to grow, season after season, year after year, a love born from a stranger's ring, but sustained by the choice to build a life together come what may.